You ever feel like the world put a weight on your shoulders before you even had the chance to stand? The hospital room was quiet when he entered the world, but the storm outside had already begun. His name was Tupac Shakur, and he was born a target, not by choice, but by history. Welcome to the story of a man who used pain as poetry and turned struggle into sound. This is Tupac's life, raw, unfiltered, and more than music. It's a fight for identity, for freedom, and for truth. He was born on June 16, 1971, in East Harlem, New York. But before he took his first breath, he was already in a war. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a Black Panther, a warrior in the front lines of a revolution. While pregnant with Tupac, she was in jail, facing over 150 charges from the U.S. government. She stood trial while carrying him in her womb, fighting not just for her freedom, but for the future of her unborn son. She beat the case, without a lawyer, without a dollar, just intelligence, fire, and belief. Tupac would carry that same fire in his soul, forever. From the very beginning, life for Tupac wasn't soft. He didn't grow up with lullabies or fairy tales. He grew up with whispered names of FBI agents, stories of betrayal, revolution, poverty, and survival. He learned that justice wasn't guaranteed, that truth came with a price. As a boy, he moved often, from Harlem to Baltimore, bouncing between broken homes and broken dreams. The rent was never secure. The food was sometimes missing, but the words never left him. He started writing early. Poems, letters, rhymes. He wrote about pain, about streets, about dreams he couldn't afford to have. Teachers noticed his spark. In middle school, he would quote Shakespeare, not because someone told him to, but because he felt it. Cowards die many times before their deaths. He knew what that meant. He had seen it. Fear around every corner. In Baltimore, he found a sanctuary, the Baltimore School for the Arts. It was there he learned ballet, jazz, acting, poetry, and passion. It was there he found his voice, not the one that rapped, not yet, but the one that made people stop and listen. He met Jada Pinkett there, a soul connection, a sister in spirit. She once said, Pac was like a magnet for pain, but he transformed it into something beautiful. But even in that brief piece, Tupac never forgot the world he came from. The gunshots, the drugs, the sirens. His best friends were getting locked up, or worse, disappearing. He wasn't blind to the streets. He just wanted more than the streets allowed. He watched his mother fall into addiction. He watched heroes become hollow. He watched his people choke under the weight of a system that never wanted them to rise. And in those nights, when he couldn't sleep, he wrote. Words became his armor, his sword, his escape. As a teenager, Tupac moved again, this time to the West Coast, Marin City, California, a place with more concrete, more chaos, and more noise. But Tupac, he carried rhythm in his scars. He was about to speak, not just for himself, but for every kid who felt invisible. He didn't want to be a rapper. He wanted to be heard. And that fire, it was just beginning to burn. He walked into the room like he'd already lived 5 lifetimes, and still had something left to prove. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. Not yet. But Tupac Amaru Shakur had something more powerful than fame. He had something to say. And nothing, not poverty, not pain, not the prison of expectations, could silence him. California was rough. Marin City chewed up kids like him and spit them out forgotten. But Tupac wasn't meant to be forgotten. He was a storm building, fast, raw. He started hanging with a group called the Digital Underground. Known more for their funky style and humor than politics, they weren't exactly his voice, but they gave him a microphone, and Tupac knew what to do with it. At first, he danced backup, learned the ropes, studied the rhythm, watched the industry, observed how fame worked, who got it, who lost it, and who paid for it with their soul. But when he finally got the chance to drop a verse, he dropped fire. In 1991, he released his debut album, Tupacalypse Now. No radio hits, no shiny hooks, just a truth most artists were too scared to say out loud. He talked about police brutality before it became a headline. He rapped about racism, about fear, about young black men being hunted in their own neighborhoods. Brenda's Got a Baby wasn't just a song. It was a mirror to the world, showing everything society refused to see. A 12-year-old girl, pregnant, alone, forgotten. It wasn't entertainment. It was reality. And Tupac forced us to look at it. The media hated it. Politicians called it dangerous. The Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle, even said Tupac's album had no place in our society. Tupac didn't care. He wasn't here to comfort the comfortable. He was here to make them uncomfortable. He said, "I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee I will spark the brain that will." That spark had already lit a flame, and it was spreading. He was young, hungry, and reckless. His interviews were intense, passionate. You could see the storm behind his eyes. Some called him angry. Some called him a prophet. He called himself a soldier of the struggle. But fame, it came fast, and with it came chaos. Tupac started getting attention, real attention, not just from fans, but from the people in power. And when you speak too loudly in a world built on silence, you become a threat. But he didn't stop. Tracks like Keep Ya Head Up and I Get Around showed his duality. He could uplift, he could entertain, he could talk about love, loss, and lust, all in the same breath. He was never just one thing, never just a rapper, never just a rebel. He was contradiction. He was balance. He was the rose growing from concrete, and he wanted you to see the thorns. With every stage he stepped on, Tupac turned pain into performance. He didn't rap for people. He rapped through them, like he was speaking from a deeper place, one most were too afraid to visit. He once said, "Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside while still alive." And Tupac, he was alive in every way, too alive for the world around him, but the fame was growing faster than he could handle. Fans wanted a savior. Labels wanted a product. The streets wanted proof he was real. And all Tupac wanted was to stay human in a world trying to turn him into a myth. Fame can lift you to the clouds or light a match underneath you. By now, Tupac was more than a rapper. He was a movement with a microphone, unfiltered, unapologetic, and unchained. But the world doesn't like truth when it sounds like revolution. And Tupac made truth sound like thunder. Every interview felt like a war cry. He didn't just talk, he challenged. He called out politicians, police, racism, media, and he did it without flinching. He said things others whispered. He yelled what others buried. In a country still pretending racism was over, Tupac stood tall and said, "We ain't even started healing yet." He knew the system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. And he wasn't begging for justice. He was demanding it. But with every word, the walls closed in. By 1993, the media painted him as a menace. Every headline twisted his rage into villainy. Every outburst made national news. And the police? They started watching. That same year, outside an award show in Atlanta, Tupac got into a scuffle with two off-duty cops. One pulled a gun. Tupac pulled his own. Shots were fired. One officer hit in the buttocks, the other in the leg. They arrested him. But charges were dropped when it was revealed the officers were drunk, armed illegally, and had initiated the fight. Still, the message was loud. Tupac was dangerous, and that label would stick. But behind the chaos, behind the headlines and mugshots, was a young man torn in two. He wanted peace, but couldn't ignore injustice. He wanted to inspire, but couldn't escape his environment. He wanted love, but the streets only taught survival. He once said, "I'm not perfect, but I'll be damned if I don't speak from my heart." And he did, again and again. He rapped about single mothers, dead friends, dirty cops, and broken dreams. "Keep Ya Head Up" wasn't just a song. It was a hug to every woman left behind. "Trapped" was a confession. "Hellraiser" was a prayer. And his voice, that trembling mix of pain and purpose, cut deeper than any beat. But the spotlight is never kind to souls on fire. Fame fed the flames. Groupies, enemies, cameras, courtrooms. Everyone wanted a piece of Tupac. Everyone had an opinion. He was too real for TV, too honest for the industry, too powerful for silence. In 1994, things began to unravel. Accusations, rumors, more court dates. Tupac was facing lawsuits, interviews gone viral, and a growing list of enemies, both in the media and the streets. He was no longer just fighting for expression. He was fighting to stay free. But behind the chaos, there was always the art. He once said, "I'm trying to find my soul, but it's hard when the devil keeps showing up disguised as fame." And that devil was about to kick the door in. Sometimes the loudest battles are the ones you fight alone. By late 1994, Tupac wasn't just at war with the world. He was at war with himself, caught between the voice of a prophet and the habits of a street soldier. One foot in the studio, one foot in the courtroom, and every step felt like it could be his last. The charges came like thunder. A sexual assault case. Tupac swore he didn't do it, swore it was a setup. But the headlines had already made up their mind. He sat in courtrooms, wearing a suit, but carrying the weight of the hood on his back. The media tore him apart. The same kid who once quoted Shakespeare in school was now being called a predator. He said, "I was raised in a world that taught me not to trust. Now they expect me to trust a judge." He didn't see justice. He saw judgment. And then it got worse. November 30th, 1994. Quad Recording Studios, New York City. Tupac walked into the lobby, ready to record. Seconds later, 5 bullets tore through his body. One grazed his head, one hit his hand, 2 in the groin, 1 in the thigh. Bleeding, broken, betrayed. He was robbed, shot, and left for dead. As he was wheeled into the ambulance, he stared into the camera, middle fingers up, face cold, eyes wide open. He lived, but the man who walked out of that hospital was not the same. In a wheelchair, barely healed, he returned to court. The next day, the verdict came down. Guilty. They gave him 1.5 to 4.5 years. He said nothing, just stood there. Broken ribs, shattered trust, handcuffed wrists. The system had finally taken him. February 1995, Clinton Correctional Facility, maximum security. Tupac was now inmate number 95A1140, No stage, no crowd, no freedom. Just bars, cement, and time to think. He read a lot. Machiavelli, Malcolm X, Sun Tzu. He wrote a lot more. He started seeing himself differently, not just as a victim, not just as a rebel, but as a symbol. Meanwhile, outside, his music refused to die. Me Against the World dropped while he was locked up, and it exploded. #1 on the charts. The first artist in history to hit #1 from behind bars. Dear Mama became an anthem, a tear-stained letter to the woman who gave him life, even while battling addiction. Millions heard the pain in his voice, but very few understood the rage behind it. In prison, Tupac had time to reflect on the betrayal, on the lies, on the fact that he'd almost died and no one in the industry had his back. He once said, "I trust no one, not even myself sometimes." He started to believe there was no way out, that the world didn't want Tupac the poet, just Tupac the spectacle. But in the darkest cell, a door opened. A visit came, and with it an offer. Suge Knight, CEO of Death Row Records. Known for power, intimidation, and loyalty, at a cost. He said, "I'll get you out of prison, but you gotta ride with me." Tupac signed the papers. 3 albums, 1 signature, freedom for a price. And just like that, the doors opened. Tupac stepped out of prison and into a world that had already written his eulogy. But he wasn't a ghost. He was a storm, and he was coming. He didn't walk out of prison. He rose out of it, reborn but burning. October 1995. The gates of Clinton Correctional creaked open, and out came a man carrying more than scars. Tupac wasn't free. Not really. He was unleashed. Behind him was a cell. Ahead of him, a battlefield. Suge Knight had kept his promise. Bailed Tupac out. $1.4 million. In return, Tupac was now the new crown jewel of Death Row Records. A kingdom of red carpets and razor wire. Luxury wrapped in danger. And Pac? He didn't tiptoe in. He came out swinging. His voice was sharper. His eyes colder. His heart still beating, but guarded by rage. Within weeks, he hit the studio. Like a man on fire. Track after track. Verse after verse. 6 songs in one night. Sometimes 10. He didn't sleep. He didn't slow down. He didn't breathe, not really. He rapped like time was running out. And the music? It wasn't just good. It was historic. He dropped California Love with Dr. Dre, a sun-drenched anthem for the West Coast. He recorded All Eyes on Me, a double album, the first of its kind in hip-hop. It was loud, rich, angry, and unapologetic, a celebration and a warning. All Eyes on Me wasn't just a title, it was reality. Everyone was watching, cops, media, enemies, even friends. But Tupac wasn't just making music, he was making war. The 1994 shooting still haunted him. He believed he'd been set up, and he blamed people who once stood beside him. He pointed the finger at Biggie Smalls, at Bad Boy Records, at the East Coast scene. Whether it was fact or paranoia, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Hit 'em Up dropped like a bomb. No metaphors, no masks, just raw venom. He didn't just diss, he destroyed. He called out names, accused lovers, threatened rivals. It was personal, it was brutal, and it lit the match. The East Coast versus West Coast war had a soundtrack now, and Tupac had just turned the volume all the way up. But behind the bravado, he was hurting. In private, he was more philosopher than thug. He talked about betrayal like a man still bleeding from it. He once said, I'm paranoid because I've seen friends turn into strangers faster than a bullet leaves a barrel. Every laugh felt fake. Every handshake, checked twice. Every crowd, a threat. He was becoming trapped, not in a cell, but in his own mind. Still, he smiled for the cameras. Still, he performed for the crowds. But the fire inside was changing. It wasn't just anger. It was urgency. He started talking about death, a lot. He told people he didn't think he'd make it to 25. He wrote songs like If I Die Tonight and So Many Tears. He wasn't playing tough. He was telling the future. In interviews, he seemed older, not in years, but in weight, like a man who'd lived too many lives in too little time. He said, I might not live long, but while I'm here, I'm gonna make noise. I'm gonna make change. I'm gonna make history. And he did. Every word he wrote felt like a final letter. Every beat, a heartbeat closer to silence. But he wasn't ready to go just yet. There was still music to make, still truth to spit, still fire left in him. He was living like he had 30 days left, and every second was gasoline. By 1996, Tupac wasn't just an artist. He was a phenomenon, a storm in motion, a man sprinting toward destiny, fists clenched, heart burning. But no matter how fast he moved, the shadows kept pace. He was now death row's brightest star, and death row was more than a label. It was a kingdom built on loyalty, blood, and fear. Suge Knight ran it like a boss. Expensive suits by day, street rules by night. And Tupac, he became the face of it all. Flashy, loud, untouchable. He bought luxury cars, rented mansions, gave money away like water. But deep down, he was still that same boy from Harlem, still writing, still watching, still wondering who he could trust. The East Coast versus West Coast war was no longer about lyrics. It was real. It was dangerous, and it was closing in. The media loved it. Magazine covers, headlines, they made the beef into a business. But Tupac wasn't pretending. He believed it. He saw betrayal in every look, enemies in every smile, and the pain from that 1994 shooting never healed. He wrapped it, spoke it, carried it like a scar on his soul. Still, the music didn't stop. It couldn't. He recorded non-stop, sometimes 4 songs a night. He filmed gang-related, gridlocked, started writing scripts. He had dreams bigger than rap, dreams of building his own label, his own movement, his own legacy. He even talked about leaving death row. But freedom has enemies. And Tupac, he had too many. Behind the bravado, he was changing. You could hear it in his voice. The rage was still there. But now, there was reflection. Tracks like Changes, I Ain't Mad at Ya, Unconditional Love. Songs that felt like goodbyes wrapped in melody. And in interviews, he began to hint at something deeper. I'm not saying I'm gonna live forever, but while I'm here, I'll live for something. He wrote letters to Black youth, spoke about unity, talked about healing, redemption. He was thinking bigger now. Not just about rap, about revolution. Not just about money, about meaning. But just as he began to rise into something greater, fate closed in. September 7th, 1996, Las Vegas. Tupac was in town to watch Mike Tyson fight. He arrived with Suge Knight, clean suit, gold chain, energy electric. Tyson won in under 2 minutes. After the fight, in the MGM Grand Lobby, a fight broke out. Tupac, Suge, and their entourage jumped a man named Orlando Anderson, a known gang affiliate. Security cameras caught it all. Hours later, they were riding down the Las Vegas Strip. Black BMW, top down, music up. Tupac sat in the passenger seat. No bulletproof vest, no fear. At 11:15 p.m., they stopped at a red light. A white Cadillac pulled up beside them, windows down, gunfire. 4 bullets tore into Tupac's chest. Suge tried to drive. Tires screeched, glass shattered, blood spilled. Tupac slumped forward, still alive, but barely. 6 days in the hospital. Tubes, machines, silence. The world held its breath. Outside, fans gathered, prayed, cried, held signs, lit candles. But inside that hospital room, the fight was ending. His mother said he looked peaceful, as if the war inside him had finally gone quiet. September 13th, 1996. Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. 4:03 p.m. He was 25 years old. But legends don't die. They echo. And Tupac's voice was just getting started. He left this world like he lived in it, in fire, in chaos, and in purpose. September 13th, 1996. The world stopped. A hospital curtain closed. A heartbeat faded. And the voice of a generation went silent. But only for a moment, because Tupac Shakur was never meant to be just flesh. He was spirit. He was scripture. He was a mirror held up to a broken world. And mirrors never die. The headlines read, "Rapper killed in drive-by shooting." But those who knew it wasn't just a rapper. It was a poet, a prophet, a brother, a son. It was a kid who once wrote love letters in poverty, who memorized Shakespeare under streetlights, who believed his words could save lives, even if he couldn't save his own. The funeral was private. The grief was global. Fans lit candles from LA to Johannesburg. Graffiti murals exploded across walls from London to Tokyo. Tears fell where beats once dropped. But something strange happened after Tupac died. He kept living. New music started to appear. Albums, verses, voice recordings. It was as if he was still in the booth, still rapping from the other side. The Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory, dropped under the alias Machiavelli. It was dark, furious, prophetic. Some called it a masterpiece. Others called it a warning. And some refused to believe he was gone at all. Conspiracy theories exploded. Tupac faked his death. Tupac escaped to Cuba. Tupac is watching, waiting, planning his return. People said they saw him in New Orleans, in Jamaica, in Vegas weeks after the shooting. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he became too big to bury. Because even now, decades later, Tupac is everywhere. In classrooms, in protests, in headphones, in hearts. His words are still carved into the consciousness of the world. I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee I will spark the brain that will. He did. You hear it in Kendrick. You see it in J. Cole. You feel it in every artist who uses truth like a weapon. But beyond the legend, there was still the man. Afeni Shakur, his mother, his warrior, spent the rest of her life protecting his name, spreading his message, and continuing his mission. She founded the Tupac Amaru Shakur Foundation, giving voice to young artists, dreamers, and revolutionaries. She turned his pain into purpose, just like he did. And when she passed in 2016, the world mourned again, because the fire that made Tupac came from her. So what was Tupac really? Not just a rapper, not just a rebel, not just a martyr. He was the sound of a generation trying to breathe. He was the rage of the silenced, the softness of the tough, the tears behind the tattoos. He taught us that real power doesn't come from a mic or a gun or a million fans. It comes from truth, from heart, from refusing to be silent when silence is expected. Tupac once said, "Reality is wrong. Dreams are for real." And maybe that's the legacy. Not just the music, not just the mystery, but the dream. A dream that we can speak, create, rise, fight, fall, and still matter. A dream that outlives the body, that survives bullets, that echoes forever. He was born in fire. He lived in storms. He died young. But Tupac Shakur lives. Every time truth is spoken, every time pain becomes poetry, every time someone dares to dream out loud, he lives. If this moved you, inspired you, or helped you see him in a new light, share it. Because his story isn't just his, it's ours. The rose that grew from concrete is still growing, and the world is still watching.